it's been a fire hose of stuff going on in the federal government generally, in the Department of Justice fairly specifically this week. Some have described it as a shock and awe campaign, which might be what it is. I guess the danger is in covering Trump 2.0. How do we deal with this? Because these things have real implications. Everything Joyce just described, people are affected by this. This is not an abstraction.
We tried to tell y'all. I mean, Ali, I wrote specifically about this issue, what he was going to do to the Department of Justice multiple times during the election cycle, because as you pointed out in your open, this was all written down. So I don't like the shock and awe version of this, because if you had been paying attention, they wrote it down. They told you exactly what they were going to do and exactly how you were going to do it. And a majority of white people voted for this. This is the disgusting version of America that people want. And oh, by the way, eggs are still more expensive. So you didn't even get that. Great job, white folks. In terms of how we cover it as a media or as a media group, right? We have to stop acting like any of these things have any basis in reality, right? Your earlier segment about birthright citizenship is a perfect example of how you should cover it. There is no question about whether or not birthright citizenship is constitutional. It just is, right? There is no question about whether or not the Civil Rights Act should apply. It just does. And every time the media tries to sane wash Trump, whitewash Trump, explain Trump, defend Trump, what they're doing is muddying the waters on these issues that we have already decided, right? And I'm not saying that there's not a place for nuance. I actually wrote in The Nation about how if Trump wants to end DEI programs, that's legal. DEI is a policy. DEI is a policy invented by white folks to try to stop other white folks from being racist. If they want to end the policy, the next media question shouldn't be like, oh my God, you're ending DEI. The next media question should be, okay, so what are you doing to combat racism in employment and hiring? What are you doing to combat sexism in employment and hiring in the federal government, the largest employer in the country? Because if the answer is nothing, well, then that becomes illegal. Well, then that violates the Civil Rights Act. That violates the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause. So the question has to be, fine, you want to end DEI, what's next, right? It's all like, you're going to repeal it. What are you going to replace it with? Because just going back to antebellum racism, that's what's illegal. That's an interesting point. My stage manager, Joe, is listening to you, thinking, and he's got a look on his face and says, does Ellie think he's going to get an answer to that question? But I appreciate that you're offering that we ask it. Joyce, Ellie makes an interesting point on a few points. The Civil Rights Division, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, birthright citizenship. These things to normal people are just, there's right and wrong, there's obvious, there's correct, there's incorrect. Doesn't seem to matter around here. One of the things that is getting a little bit of pushback from a couple of Republicans is the release of all these January 6th convicts, including some really violent ones, including the heads of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, who are now claiming that they're part of a comeback.
Yeah. So look, here's how we can understand how off the rails these releases, these pardons and commutations are. You know, typically one of the important criteria for giving someone a pardon and releasing them back into their community is to make sure that they're not dangerous, to make sure that they're someone who's been rehabilitated in prison, who's remorseful, who wants to go back and have a second chance and lead a productive life. And just from your open, Allie, we know that that's not the case here, right? There are people who are concerned, people who need protective orders against some of these people who Donald Trump has pardoned. Those pardons were transactional. They were about rewarding people who supported him when he'd lost an election and was willing to resort to violence to try to hold on to the presidency. I don't think that we should make any effort to both sides that. I think that we have to be, to your larger point here, very clear about truth and falsity. You know, early on in Trump's first administration, we learned that they believed in something called alternative facts. And that's led us down this perilous path where all too often, right, we're willing, to Ellie's point, to think about, well, you know, maybe we should just be worried about the DEI policy as opposed to finding a legal solution for it. I think this is a moment to be clear, to talk about the fact that these pardons are wrong, that Donald Trump violated the trust that Americans gave to him. Democrats need to be clear in talking about that at every opportunity, and Republicans should be asked about it. And when these people begin to reoffend, we're told that one of the people who's been released has already been taken back into custody on gun charges. When they begin to reoffend, when people are threatened, then the accountability needs to live where it belongs, in Donald Trump's lap.
Ellie?
I would love for Democrats to speak with a clear voice with this, right? I would love for John Fetterman to not be taking pictures with pardoned terrorists, but that's not the Democratic Party we have right now. So while, yes, there are some Republicans who are squeamish, I guess, about releasing convicted felons and cop abusers back into the general population, and while Democrats generally are like, well, that's clearly wrong, we shouldn't do that, nothing's actually happening with it. Nothing's actually going to stop these people. Again, this is what Trump promised. This is what white folks voted for. And this is what you normalize whenever you act like Trump is a regular, normal president who just has a different point of view than you do, right? So, like, it would be great if we could stand as one and draw a line in the sand and say this far, no further. But we're not going to do that. Our party is always on the back foot, always falling back. And Republicans are such pathetic cowards. Even as you're saying that there's some Republicans who are squeamish about it, like, how many of them are on your show? How many of them are out in public really saying this cannot happen? I won't vote for anything that Trump does if he does this, right? None say that. We're all there, all willing to accept the unacceptable. And that is what, look, Trump was clear about what he was going to do. And to quote the inventor of the internet, Al Gore, we are now entering a time of consequences.
We are, in fact, entering a time of consequences. Thanks to both of you. We appreciate all of your wisdom and your analysis on this one. Joyce Vance is a former United States attorney, MSNBC contributor and columnist, co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast. Elie Mystal is a justice correspondent for The Nation, author of the upcoming book, Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. All right, coming up this week, the three richest men in America who also happen to own massively influential media platforms were seated front and center at the president's inauguration. It was a display of the consolidation of wealth, power, and information many Americans are understandably concerned about, and some are, in fact,